Rain fell mercilessly upon the cobblestone streets of Ravenshire as Lady Eleanor Blackwood made her way through the darkened alleys, her tattered shawl offering little protection against the biting cold. The hem of her once fine dress, now faded and worn, dragged through murky puddles, collecting the filth of a city that had long since abandoned her. 3 months had passed since her husband, the respected physician Edward Blackwood, had succumbed to the mysterious plague that had swept through the lower quarters of the city, leaving Eleanor alone with mounting debts and 2 hungry children awaiting her return home. The grey stone buildings loomed overhead like silent judges, their windows glowing with warm light that only emphasized the darkness surrounding her. Eleanor clutched a small pouch containing the meagre coins she had earned from selling her late husband's remaining medical instruments, the last vestiges of their comfortable past life. It wasn't enough, not nearly enough, but perhaps it would convince Lord Percival Thornwood to grant her an extension on the rent. Thornwood Manor rose from the mist at the edge of the city, its Gothic spires piercing the night sky like accusing fingers. Iron gates creaked in protest as Eleanor pushed them open, the sound echoing across the immaculate gardens that stood in stark contrast to the squalor of the tenements he owned. Gargoyles perched along the roof's edge seemed to follow her with their stone eyes as she approached the massive oak door. Before she could knock, the door swung open to reveal Horace, Lord Thornwood's gaunt steward, his face a mask of practiced indifference. "Lady Blackwood," he said, her former title now little more than mockery on his lips. "His lordship has been expecting you." The grand entrance hall, with its polished marble and ornate tapestries, made Eleanor painfully aware of her bedraggled appearance. Candelabras cast dancing shadows across ancestral portraits whose eyes seemed to regard her with the same disdain that had become her daily companion. Horace led her through the hall and into Lord Thornwood's study, a room filled with the scent of expensive tobacco and leather-bound books that Edward had once dreamed of owning. Lord Percival Thornwood sat behind an imposing mahogany desk, his corpulent figure draped in a smoking jacket of burgundy velvet. His fingers, adorned with gaudy rings that caught the firelight, drummed impatiently upon the polished surface. At 45, his once handsome features had grown bloated with excess, but his eyes remained sharp, calculating, missing nothing that might be exploited for profit or pleasure. "Ah, the widow Blackwood graces us with her presence," he said, his voice dripping with false cordiality. "Come to beg for charity once again, have we?" Eleanor summoned what dignity remained to her and stepped forward. "My lord, I've brought what I can of this month's rent." She placed the small pouch on his desk, the coins inside making a pathetically quiet sound as they settled. "I only ask for a brief extension for the remainder." Thornwood didn't even glance at the pouch. Instead, his eyes travelled slowly over Eleanor's figure in a way that made her skin crawl. Though the years and hardship had weathered her, at 32, Eleanor's beauty had not entirely faded. Her chestnut hair, though simply arranged, framed features that still bore the elegance of her former station, and her green eyes, though shadowed with worry, remained clear and intelligent. Extensions. Always extensions. Thornwood sighed dramatically, rising from his seat to circle the desk. "You know, when I acquired your husband's debts after his untimely demise, I did so out of the goodness of my heart. Many would have simply evicted you and your offspring." He spoke the last word as though referring to vermin. "My children are of noble blood, same as yours, Lord Thornwood," Eleanor said quietly, her hands clasped tightly before her to hide their trembling. Thornwood's laugh echoed harshly against the book-lined walls. "Noble blood! How quickly we forget that your husband was merely a physician who married above his station, and you the daughter of a family whose nobility was as thin as their purse. No, Lady Blackwood, your children share more with the street urchins than with my Frederick." Frederick Thornwood, Percival's only son, was known throughout Ravenshire for his cruelty, a trait carefully nurtured by his father. At 17, He already displayed the callousness that had made the Thornwood name both feared and despised among the common folk. "I only need time," Eleanor persisted. "I have prospects for employment at the millinery shop." "A noble widow reduced to crafting hats," Thornwood mused, moving uncomfortably close. "How the mighty have fallen. Perhaps there are other arrangements we might make, arrangements that would benefit us both." His breath, hot and laced with brandy, fell against her cheek. Eleanor stepped back, her spine straightening. "I am here to discuss business only, my lord." His face hardened instantly, amusement replaced by cold fury. "Then let us discuss business. Your rent is due in full by tomorrow evening, or you and your brats will find yourselves on the street. Winter approaches, Widow Blackwood. The nights grow cold, and the plague lingers in those damp alleys. How long do you suppose your precious children would survive?" "You cannot mean that," Eleanor whispered, horror rising in her throat like bile. "They are but 7 and 10 years old." "I mean every word," Thornwood replied, returning to his seat. "This is not charity, madam. This is commerce. Perhaps next time you'll be more receptive to alternative arrangements." Eleanor felt the room spin around her. Without the extension, there was no hope. They would be homeless by the following night, exposed to the elements and the disease that had taken Edward. Her children's faces flashed before her mind, Thomas with his father's serious eyes, and Emma with her curious nature and delicate health that required medicines they could scarcely afford. "Please," she said, the word burning her throat with its humiliation. "If not for me, then for the memory of my husband. He saved your cousin's life during the last fever outbreak, and charged handsomely for his services, I recall," Thornwood countered. "Sentiment is a luxury for those who can afford it, Lady Blackwood. You cannot." With a dismissive wave, he summoned Horace. "Show Lady Blackwood out, and ensure the constable is available tomorrow evening. We may require his services for an eviction." Horace's bony hand closed around Eleanor's arm, guiding her firmly toward the door. As they reached the entrance hall, the main doors burst open, allowing a gust of wind and rain to sweep into the manor. A figure stood silhouetted against the night, tall and imposing, wrapped in a black cloak that seemed to absorb what little light reached it. Horace froze, his grip on Eleanor's arm suddenly slack. "Lord Varkos," he stammered, bowing deeply. We did not expect you." The figure stepped forward, water cascading from his cloak onto the pristine marble floor. As he pushed back his hood, Eleanor caught her breath. The man, if man he was, possessed an otherworldly beauty that was both enthralling and terrifying. His features were aristocratic, almost sculptural in their perfection. High cheekbones, a strong jaw, and lips that held the suggestion of a perpetual knowing smile. But it was his eyes that truly captured her, deep crimson, like wine held to the light, or fresh blood upon snow. "Evidently," Lord Varkos replied, his voice a melodious baritone that seemed to resonate through Eleanor's very bones. His accent was indeterminate, hinting at lands far beyond Ravenshire's borders. "I find myself caught in this dreadful weather and require accommodation for the night." Of course, my lord," Horace replied. "Lord Thornwood will be honoured. He is in his study. Shall I announce you?" Lord Varkos removed his gloves with deliberate slowness, revealing long, pale fingers that ended in nails that seemed almost claw-like. "No need to trouble yourself. I recall the way." His crimson gaze fell upon Eleanor, and she felt a peculiar sensation, as though he were reading her thoughts as easily as one might read a book. And who might this be? Before Horace could answer, Eleanor found her voice. "Eleanor Blackwood, my lord." She curtsied, the movement automatic, a remnant of her former life. "Lady Blackwood," he corrected gently, taking her hand and raising it to his lips. His touch was cold, yet it sent a wave of warmth rushing through her. "The widow of Dr. Edward Blackwood, I presume. His reputation reached even my distant estate. A brilliant mind and a compassionate soul, a rare combination." Eleanor looked up in surprise. "You knew of my husband?" "I make it my business to know of exceptional people, Lady Blackwood," Lord Varkos replied, His eyes seemed to darken momentarily as he glanced toward the study. "Just as I make it my business to know of exceptional cruelty." A chill that had nothing to do with her damp clothing ran down Eleanor's spine. There was something predatory in the way Lord Varkos pronounced those words, something that spoke of power and danger carefully contained. "The lady was just leaving," Horace interjected nervously. "Indeed." Lord Varkos raised an eyebrow. "In this tempest, without even a carriage waiting? That seems inhospitable." Before anyone could respond, the study door opened and Lord Thornwood emerged, his face arranged in a welcoming smile that faltered when he saw who stood in his entrance hall. "Lord Varkos," he said, visibly paling. "What an unexpected pleasure." "Lord Thornwood," Varkos inclined his head slightly. "I was just becoming acquainted with Lady Blackwood. She was about to brave the storm after what I gather was a business meeting with you." Thornwood's eyes darted between them, calculation and fear warring in his expression. "Merely routine matters regarding a property I manage. Nothing that need concern you, my lord." "On the contrary," Varkos replied, his smile revealing teeth that seemed unnaturally sharp. "I find myself very concerned indeed. Lady Blackwood is leaving in distress on a night unfit for travel, while you emerge from your study smelling of brandy and self-satisfaction. It paints a rather unflattering picture." Eleanor watched this exchange with growing astonishment. No one spoke to Lord Thornwood this way, certainly not in his own home, yet here was this stranger, this Lord Varkos, addressing him with barely veiled contempt, and Thornwood was accepting it with a deference that bordered on fear. "Perhaps I might offer the lady my carriage," Varkos continued. "After all, we wouldn't want the widow of such a respected physician walking alone through Ravenshire's dangerous streets. What would people think of your hospitality?" Thornwood's face contorted briefly before settling into a stiff smile. "Of course. How thoughtless of me. Horace, arrange for my carriage to take Lady Blackwood home." "That won't be necessary," Varkos interjected smoothly. "My own carriage awaits outside." "I insist," he turned to Eleanor, offering his arm. "If you would allow me, Lady Blackwood." Eleanor hesitated only momentarily before placing her hand on his offered arm. The fabric of his cloak felt unusually soft beneath her fingers, almost like living skin. "You are very kind, Lord Varkos." As they moved toward the door, Varkos paused and glanced back at Thornwood. "I shall return shortly to discuss my accommodation. And perhaps," his voice dropped to a silken murmur that nonetheless carried clearly, "we might also discuss your business practices, Percival. I find them fascinating." The night air felt cleaner somehow as they stepped outside, despite the continuing rain. A magnificent black carriage waited at the bottom of the steps, drawn by 4 horses whose coats were so dark they seemed to blend with the night. No driver was visible, yet the door swung open as they approached. "How did you know?" Eleanor asked as Lord Varkos handed her into the carriage. "About my situation, I mean." Varkos settled across from her, his tall frame making the spacious carriage seem suddenly intimate. "Let us say that I have a particular sensitivity to injustice, Lady Blackwood, and to suffering." He studied her face in the dim light that emanated from a small lantern swinging from the carriage ceiling. "Thornwood threatened you with eviction, did he not?" Eleanor nodded, finding herself strangely unwilling to dissemble with this man. "By tomorrow evening. And your children? What of them?" "Thomas and Emma," she whispered, her voice breaking slightly. "They're all I have left." Varkos's expression softened, though the predatory intensity in his eyes remained. "Not all, perhaps. Tell me, Lady Blackwood, do you believe in fate?" "I used to," she admitted, "before Edward died. And now I believe only in what I can see and touch, in what I can do with my own hands to protect my children." A smile curved Varkos's lips. "A pragmatic approach. I admire that." The carriage moved through Ravenshire's streets with unnatural smoothness, as though floating above the cobblestones. "What if I told you that your encounter with Thornwood tonight was not chance, but destiny? That forces beyond your understanding have been set in motion?" Eleanor studied his otherworldly face, noting how the shadows seemed to caress rather than obscure his features. "I would say you speak in riddles, my lord." "Perhaps," he conceded. "Or perhaps I simply see what others cannot." He leaned forward slightly, his crimson eyes luminous in the darkness. "Percival Thornwood has built his fortune on the suffering of others. He has crushed countless families beneath his boot, taken what was not his to take, and mocked those he has ruined. You seem to know him well." "I know his kind," Varkos replied, a hint of ancient anger coloring his voice. "Men who mistake cruelty for strength and greed for ambition. Men who believe themselves untouchable." The carriage slowed as they approached Eleanor's modest home in the declining neighborhood that had once housed Ravenshire's respectable middle class. Light flickered behind the curtains where Mrs. Hodges, their elderly neighbor, would be watching over Thomas and Emma. "What will you do now?" Varkos asked as the carriage came to a stop. Eleanor sighed, the weight of her circumstances settling back upon her shoulders. "What I must. Beg, borrow, or—" She couldn't bring herself to complete the thought. Varkos reached across the space between them and took her hand in his cold one. "Listen carefully, Lady Blackwood. Return to your children tonight and hold them close. Tell them stories of better days to come. And tomorrow, when Lord Thornwood arrives with his constable and his threats, stand firm in your doorway." "But he'll force us out," Eleanor protested. A smile spread across Varkos's face, a smile that spoke of secrets and power and vengeance long planned. "No, he won't. For you see, by this time tomorrow night, Percival Thornwood will kneel before your door and beg your forgiveness under the light of the full moon. This I promise you." As Eleanor stepped from the carriage into the rain, she turned back, questions tumbling through her mind. "Why would you help us? What are you, Lord Varkos?" The crimson-eyed lord leaned forward, the lantern light casting half his face in shadow. "What am I? I am justice in a world that has forgotten its meaning. I am retribution for the powerless. And as for why—" his voice dropped to a whisper that seemed to carry despite the falling rain. "Let us simply say that I have waited a very, very long time for someone exactly like you, Eleanor Blackwood." The carriage door closed, and as it pulled away into the mist, Eleanor could have sworn that for a moment it was not horses pulling the conveyance, but great shadowy wings beating against the night. She stood transfixed until it disappeared from view, the promise of Thornwood kneeling at her door, echoing in her mind like a forbidden prayer. Inside her humble home, her children slept peacefully, unaware of the strange encounter that had just transpired, or of the ancient blood-red eyes that would soon turn their full attention to the man who had threatened their future. For Lord Varkos was returning to Thornwood Manor, where Percival awaited, blissfully ignorant that his long history of cruelty was about to exact its price under the guidance of a being who had perfected the art of vengeance over centuries of darkness. As the carriage bearing Lord Varkos disappeared into the mist, Eleanor stood motionless in the rain, her mind reeling from the encounter. The mysterious lord's promise echoed in her thoughts like a distant bell, both ominous and alluring. She shook herself from her reverie and hurried to her front door. The small wooden structure, a far cry from the elegant townhouse she had once called home. Mrs. Hodges greeted her with a concerned frown, her weathered face creasing further as she took in Eleanor's damp appearance. "You'll catch your death in this weather, my dear," she whispered, glancing toward the small bedroom where Thomas and Emma slept. Was Lord Thornwood understanding?" Eleanor hung her tattered shawl on a peg by the door, watching as water dripped onto the worn floorboards. "Not in the slightest," she admitted, then hesitated. How could she explain the strange encounter with Lord Varkos, the crimson-eyed nobleman with his impossible promises and predatory grace? "But I may have found an ally of sorts." Mrs. Hodges raised a skeptical eyebrow but didn't press further. She had seen too much of life's cruelties to put much faith in sudden allies or fortuitous turns of fate. "The children have been fed," she said instead. "Young Thomas helped me prepare the stew. That boy has his father's hands, steady and careful. Thank you, Mrs. Hodges, for everything. Eleanor pressed a few precious coins into the elderly woman's palm. I know it isn't much. Nonsense, Mrs. Hodges interrupted, closing Eleanor's fingers back over the coins. Keep your money. You'll need it more than I will. She gathered her shawl around her thin shoulders. Besides, those children of yours bring light to these dark days. After Mrs. Hodges departed, Eleanor crept into the small bedroom her children shared. The space was barely large enough for their two narrow beds, yet somehow Edward had managed to construct a small bookshelf that hung on the wall between them. It remained filled with the books he had read to them each night, tales of adventure and mystery, of heroes who overcame impossible odds. Thomas slept with one arm flung above his head, his serious face relaxed in slumber. At 10, he was already trying to be the man of the house, attempting tasks far beyond his years with solemn determination. Emma, curled in a tight ball beneath her blankets, looked fragile even in sleep. At 7, she had inherited her father's brilliant mind, but also his delicate constitution. The past winter's cough still lingered in her chest, a persistent reminder of how easily Eleanor could lose her. I won't let him take you from our home, Eleanor whispered, brushing a strand of hair from Emma's forehead. Whatever it takes, whatever I must do. She settled into the chair between their beds, the same chair Edward had used during his nightly reading sessions, and for the first time in months, allowed herself to hope. Lord Varkos had promised that Thornwood would beg at her doorstep tomorrow night. It seemed impossible, yet there had been such certainty in those blood-red eyes. "What are you?" she had asked him. His answer hung in her thoughts as she drifted into an uneasy sleep. I am justice in a world that has forgotten its meaning. At Thornwood Manor, Percival paced his study like a caged animal, his earlier confidence replaced by visible anxiety. The fire had died down to embers, casting the room in shadows that seemed to move independently of the flickering light. "Damn that man and his timing," he muttered, pouring himself another generous serving of brandy. "Of all the nights to appear on my doorstep." The door to the study opened without a knock, and Lord Varkos glided into the room with the silent grace of a predator. Gone was the rain-soaked traveller. In his place stood an aristocrat of impeccable bearing, dressed in clothes that were simultaneously fashionable yet somehow timeless. A black tailcoat of unusual cut over a waistcoat of deep crimson that matched his unsettling eyes. "Percival," he said, the name sounding like an indictment on his lips. "I trust you've arranged suitable accommodations for my stay?" Thornwood swallowed nervously. "Of course, my lord. The east wing has been prepared. My finest rooms." "How thoughtful," Varkos remarked, moving to the bookshelves that lined one wall. He ran a pale finger along the spines of several expensive volumes. "You've expanded your collection since my last visit, though I note your taste remains predictable." "It has been 5 years since you honored us with your presence," Thornwood replied, trying to regain some of his usual pomposity. "Much has changed in Ravenshire, and yet much remains the same." Varkos turned, fixing Thornwood with his crimson gaze. "You continue to profit from the misery of others. The widow Blackwood, for instance, a woman of quality reduced to begging for mercy from a man who has none." Thornwood's cheeks flushed with anger and fear. "My business dealings are none of your concern, Lord Varkos. I acquired Dr. Blackwood's debts legally after his death. The terms of repayment are mine to set." "Legal," Varkos repeated, as though tasting the word. "An interesting concept, legality. It so rarely coincides with justice, wouldn't you agree?" He moved toward Thornwood's desk with fluid grace. "Tell me, did you acquire those debts before or after you ensured the good doctor would be sent to treat patients in the plague-infested lower quarters?" The color drained from Thornwood's face. "I don't know what you're implying." "No implications, Percival, merely observations." Varkos picked up a paperweight from the desk, a crystal sphere containing what appeared to be a preserved scorpion. "Beautiful and deadly, much like the machinations of men who believe themselves beyond consequence." He set the paperweight down and leaned forward, his hands flat on the desk's polished surface. You arranged for Edward Blackwood to be assigned to the most dangerous patients, knowing his sense of duty would not allow him to refuse. You anticipated his death, purchased his debts at a fraction of their value, and now torment his widow with eviction threats while harboring lustful designs on her person. A masterful plan, worthy of the scorpion in your little ornament. Thornwood backed away, colliding with a bookshelf. These are unfounded accusations. Dr. Blackwood volunteered for those assignments. Everyone knows of his selfless character. Indeed, Varkos agreed with a terrible smile. His selflessness is well documented, as is your correspondence with Hospital Director Simmons, outlining the substantial donation you would make to the hospital should Dr. Blackwood be assigned to the quarantine ward. How could you possibly know this? Varkos finished for him. I make it my business to know the sins of men like you, Percival. I have walked this earth for a very long time, collecting the debts that justice demands. For a moment, the aristocratic veneer seemed to slip, and something ancient and inhuman flashed across Lord Varkos's face. Thornwood felt his bladder threaten to release, primal terror washing over him. What do you want from me? He whispered. Varkos straightened, adjusting his cuffs with meticulous precision. Tomorrow night, under the full moon, you will go to Lady Blackwood's residence. You will kneel at her door and beg her forgiveness. You will then sign over to her the deed to her current home and provide compensation for her husband's death, let us say the sum of £5,000. 5,000? Thornwood sputtered. That's preposterous! It would ruin me! A small price to pay for your life, wouldn't you agree? Varkos's voice dropped to a silken whisper. For make no mistake, Percival, your life hangs in the balance. Refuse me this, and what follows will make the plague seem a mercy by comparison. Thornwood collapsed into his chair, his legs no longer able to support him. Why her? Why the Blackwoods? What are they to you? Lord Varkos moved to the window, gazing out at the storm-tossed night. Let us say that I recognize in Eleanor Blackwood a quality that has become rare in this age, a luminous soul, whose light persists despite the darkness that surrounds it. Such beings deserve protection. He turned back to face Thornwood, and for an instant his shadow on the wall seemed impossibly large, with wings spread wide and horns curving from a monstrous head. As for you, consider this an opportunity for redemption, perhaps the only one you shall receive. Without waiting for a response, Varkos moved toward the door. I shall retire now. I find myself fatigued from my journey. He paused at the threshold. Oh, and Percival, do not entertain thoughts of fleeing before tomorrow night. I would find such behavior disappointing. After Varkos departed, Thornwood sat trembling in the darkened study. Outside, the rain redoubled its assault upon the windows, and somewhere in the distance thunder rolled like the laughter of vengeful gods. Morning arrived with unexpected brightness, the storm having cleared during the night. Eleanor woke stiff and cold in the chair between her children's beds. For a moment, she believed the previous night's encounter with Lord Varkos had been nothing more than a dream, a fantasy born of desperation. But as she rose and stretched her aching limbs, she noticed something on the small table by the front door. A sealed envelope that had certainly not been there when she returned home. With trembling fingers, she broke the seal, a stylized V, pressed into dark red wax that resembled congealed blood. Inside was a single sheet of expensive paper bearing an elegant script, Lady Blackwood. Stand firm this evening when Thornwood arrives. Accept nothing less than what you deserve. Justice comes with the full moon. Your servant in darkness. Eleanor stared at the note in disbelief. How had it appeared in her locked home while she slept? And what did it mean about standing firm? Last night's conversation returned to her in fragments. Varkos's promise that Thornwood would kneel at her door, begging forgiveness. "Mother?" Thomas's voice pulled her from her thoughts. He stood in the bedroom doorway, his dark hair mussed from sleep, his eyes, so like Edward's, watching her with concern beyond his years. "Is everything all right?" Eleanor quickly tucked the note into her pocket. "Yes, my darling. Just thinking about what we'll have for breakfast." She forced a smile. "Would you wake your sister while I prepare something?" As the children ate their meager meal of porridge, sweetened with the last of their honey, Eleanor's mind raced with possibilities. Should she trust in Lord Varkos's promise? Or should she spend the day desperately seeking alternative accommodations before Thornwood's inevitable arrival with the constable? "Will we have to leave our home today?" Emma asked suddenly, her small face serious. Despite Eleanor's efforts to shield her children from their dire circumstances, they were far too perceptive. "No," Eleanor replied, surprised by the certainty in her own voice. "No, we won't." Thomas looked up sharply. "But Lord Thornwood said—" "Lord Thornwood is not the final authority on our fate," Eleanor interrupted, drawing strength from some wellspring she hadn't known she possessed. "Your father built this home for us, and here we shall remain." After breakfast, Eleanor made a decision. Instead of frantically searching for new lodgings or begging for loans she couldn't repay, she would prepare for battle. She spent the morning cleaning their modest home until it shone, then retrieved Edward's medical bag from its hiding place beneath the floorboards. Inside were his surgical instruments, the few she hadn't been forced to sell. The steel scalpels and bone saw glinted in the sunlight streaming through the windows. Edward had used these tools to heal, to save lives. Eleanor prayed she wouldn't need to use them for more desperate purposes. As afternoon waned, she dressed with care in the best of her remaining clothes, a navy blue dress that, while faded, still spoke of her former station. She arranged her hair as elegantly as she could manage, without a lady's maid, and around her neck she placed the single piece of jewelry she had refused to sell, a small silver locket containing miniature portraits of Thomas and Emma as infants. "Why are you dressed so fine, Mother?" Emma asked, watching her with curious eyes. "Because tonight we receive an important visitor," Eleanor replied, smoothing her skirts. "And it's essential to look one's best when facing one's enemies." At dusk, she sent the children to Mrs. Hodges with instructions to return only when she called for them. The elderly woman had taken one look at Eleanor's face and asked no questions, simply nodding with grim understanding. Alone in the small house, Eleanor placed Edward's medical bag near the door and sat in her husband's chair by the window, waiting. The setting sun cast long shadows across the floor, and as darkness fell, she lit a single candle, conserving their precious supply. The full moon rose, its silver light filtering through the thin curtains. From somewhere in the distance came the sound of hooves on cobblestones, growing steadily louder as they approached her street. Eleanor's heart hammered in her chest, but she remained seated, her back straight, her hands folded in her lap, as her mother had taught her long ago. The carriage stopped outside. Voices murmured, one pleading, another commanding. Footsteps approached her door, hesitant and shuffling rather than confident. Then a knock, not the sharp rap of authority she had expected, but a tentative tapping. Eleanor rose, smoothed her skirts once more, and opened the door. Lord Percival Thornwood stood on her threshold, his face ashen in the moonlight. Behind him, at the gate, waited his carriage, and beside it a tall figure in black whose face she couldn't quite discern. "Lady Blackwood," Thornwood mumbled, his usual arrogance nowhere in evidence. His eyes darted nervously toward the figure by the carriage, then back to her face. That is to say, may I come in?" "No," Eleanor replied calmly, blocking the entrance. "Whatever you have to say can be said here, where the moon might witness it." Thornwood's face contorted, as though in physical pain. Then, to Eleanor's astonishment, he slowly lowered himself to one knee before her, his expensive trousers pressing into the dirt of her small front garden. "I have come to beg your forgiveness," he said, the words seeming to burn his throat as they emerged. "My treatment of you and your family has been unconscionable." Eleanor stood frozen in disbelief. This was the man who, just yesterday, had threatened to throw her children into the street, who had looked at her with predatory eyes and suggested arrangements that made her skin crawl. Now he knelt before her, trembling like a man in the grip of fever. "Forgiveness must be earned, Lord Thornwood," she said, finding her voice at last. "Words are merely air." "Indeed." Thornwood reached into his coat and withdrew several folded documents. "I have brought the deed to this house, signed over to you in perpetuity. And this," he produced a banker's draft, "is compensation for your husband's death. £5,000. Eleanor's hand shook as she accepted the papers. £5,000, a fortune that would secure her children's future, pay for Emma's medicines, perhaps even allow Thomas the education Edward had dreamed of providing him. "Why this sudden change of heart?" she asked, though she already knew the answer stood watching from the shadows by the carriage. Thornwood's eyes flickered once more toward the figure. "Let us say that I have been enlightened as to the consequences of my actions, a reckoning long overdue. And my husband's death? Were you enlightened about your role in that as well?" Thornwood flinched as though struck. "I never intended, that is to say—" "You arranged for him to be sent to the plague ward," Eleanor stated flatly. "Somehow, I've always known it. Edward was too skilled a physician to be wasted on hopeless cases unless someone wanted him there." Tears of humiliation streamed down Thornwood's bloated face. "Please, Lady Blackwood, I have done as requested. I have brought the deed and the money. Tell him I have complied." Eleanor looked past Thornwood to the figure by the carriage. In the moonlight, Lord Varkas's pale face seemed to glow with an inner radiance, his crimson eyes visible, even at this distance. He inclined his head slightly, a gesture that conveyed both respect and encouragement. "Rise, Lord Thornwood," Eleanor commanded, surprising herself with the authority in her voice. "Your penance is not yet complete, but this is an acceptable beginning." Thornwood scrambled to his feet, relief washing over his features. "Then I am forgiven." "Forgiveness requires time," Eleanor replied coolly, "but you need not fear eviction from your own home, as you would have evicted us from ours." As Thornwood backed away, Eleanor called after him, "One more thing, my lord. The other families in your tenements, those who struggle as we have struggled, you will reduce their rents by half, effective immediately." "Half?" Thornwood gasped. "But that would still leave you wealthier than most men in Ravenshire," Eleanor finished for him. "Consider it insurance against future reckonings." Thornwood glanced once more at the figure by the carriage, then nodded quickly. "As you wish, Lady Blackwood. It shall be done tomorrow." As Thornwood retreated to his carriage, Lord Varkos stepped forward into a pool of moonlight. He was dressed as he had been the previous night, in clothes that seemed to absorb the darkness around him, his skin luminous by contrast. "You handled that admirably," he said, approaching her door with that same fluid grace she remembered. "Most would have been satisfied with their own salvation. My husband believed that true healing required treating the whole community, not just individual patients," Eleanor replied. "The families in those tenements deserve better than what Thornwood has given them. Indeed they do." Varkos stopped at her threshold, making no move to enter uninvited. "And now, Lady Blackwood, you have the means to build a new life for yourself and your children." Eleanor clutched the documents to her chest, still scarcely able to believe what had transpired. "How did you accomplish this? What hold do you have over him?" "Percival Thornwood fears what lies beyond this world," Varkos replied enigmatically. "As well he should, given the ledger of his sins." His crimson eyes studied her with that same intensity that both unnerved and fascinated her. "But you, Eleanor Blackwood, you fear only failing those you love. It makes you far more formidable than you realize." Eleanor sensed that dawn would bring clarity to many things still shrouded in mystery. She also sensed that Lord Varkos would not, perhaps could not, remain in Ravenshire much longer. "Will you tell me what you are?" she asked quietly. "Before you disappear again?" Varkos smiled, revealing teeth too sharp for a mortal man. "I am many things, Eleanor. Some call my kind monsters, others angels of vengeance. The truth as always lies somewhere in between." He glanced up at the full moon. "But tonight is not for revelations. Tonight is for beginnings." He reached out, his cold fingers brushing against her cheek with surprising gentleness. "Return to your children. Tell them their future is secure. And tomorrow, when the sun rises, know that while I may not walk in its light, I shall be watching over you nonetheless." As he turned to leave, Eleanor called after him, "Will I see you again?" Varkos paused, his silhouette seeming to waver in the moonlight, becoming something larger, something with wings that stretched toward the night sky. "That, my dear Eleanor," he said, his voice carrying on the night breeze, "depends entirely on what paths you choose in the days to come. For I sense in you a darkness that mirrors my own, a capacity for justice that this world desperately needs." He melted into the shadows beyond her garden gate, his final words floating back to her like a promise, or perhaps a warning. "Sleep well, Eleanor Blackwood. Your true awakening has only just begun." Eleanor stood in her doorway, long after Lord Varkos and Thornwood's carriage had disappeared, the deed to her home and the banker's draft clutched in her hand. The full moon continued its arc across the sky, bathing her in silver light that seemed to penetrate deeper than skin, illuminating questions that had no simple answers. What was Lord Varkos? What true awakening awaited her? And most troubling of all, what had he meant about the darkness within her that mirrored his own? As an owl hooted from a nearby tree, Eleanor finally closed her door, securing it against the night. Yet even as she went to retrieve her children from Mrs. Hodges, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed her home from Thornwood Manor, something ancient and patient that had recognized in her a kindred spirit, and was now simply waiting for her to recognize it in return. The morning after Lord Thornwood's humiliation brought with it a peculiar stillness, as though Ravenshire itself held its breath in anticipation. Eleanor sat at her small kitchen table, the banker's draft and property deeds spread before her, illuminated by sunlight that seemed impossibly bright after months of perpetual gloom. "Mother, is it true?" Thomas asked, his young face serious as he studied the documents. "We truly own our home now." "Yes," Eleanor replied, still scarcely believing it herself. "And more than that, we have means to live comfortably again." She brushed her fingers over the banker's draft, the sum written upon it sufficient to restore some semblance of their former life. Emma, curled in a chair by the fire, looked up from the book she'd been reading. "Was it the red-eyed lord who helped us? The one Mrs. Hodges said she saw watching our house last night?" Eleanor's head snapped up. "Mrs. Hodges saw him. She said a tall gentleman in black stood beneath the oak tree until dawn," Thomas explained. "She thought he was a ghost or a guardian angel." "Neither, perhaps," Eleanor murmured, remembering Varkos's words. "Some call my kind monsters, others angels of vengeance. The truth as always lies somewhere in between." That afternoon Eleanor visited the bank, half expecting the draft to be rejected as fraudulent. Instead, the manager's attitude transformed from condescending to obsequious the moment he saw the sum and Thornwood's signature. By evening, she had secured new wardrobes for the children, ordered proper food to be delivered, and arranged for a physician to examine Emma's persistent cough. The following days passed in a blur of restoration. Eleanor hired 2 servants, Mrs. Hodges's niece as a maid, and a local boy as errand runner. She purchased books for Thomas, medicine for Emma, and began cautiously rebuilding the life that had been shattered by Edward's death. Yet despite these outward improvements, Eleanor found herself troubled by dreams that left her gasping in the darkness. Dreams of crimson eyes watching her from shadows, of wings spreading across a blood-red moon, of voices whispering that her awakening had only just begun. "You seem distracted, Lady Blackwood," said Mrs. Pembroke, wife of the town magistrate, who had suddenly remembered their acquaintance now that Eleanor's fortunes had improved. They sat in Eleanor's modestly refurbished parlour, taking tea as though the past months of Eleanor's poverty had been merely an unpleasant rumor. "Forgive me," Eleanor replied, forcing a smile. "I find myself preoccupied with plans for the children's education." "Understandable." Mrs. Pembroke nodded approvingly, "though I must say the change in your circumstances has been most remarkable. The talk of Ravenshire, in fact." "Is it?" Eleanor sipped her tea, uncomfortable with the gleam of curiosity in the woman's eyes. "Indeed, particularly in light of what happened to Lord Thornwood." Mrs. Pembroke leaned forward, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "Have you heard?" A chill ran down Eleanor's spine. "I've had little contact with Lord Thornwood since our business concluded." "Well," Mrs. Pembroke continued, clearly delighted to be the bearer of sensational news, "they say he's gone quite mad, reduced the rents on all his properties by half, donated enormous sums to the hospital, and has taken to locking himself in his study at sunset, crying out about demons coming to collect his soul." She raised an eyebrow. "And strangest of all, his son Frederick, that awful boy, has been sent away to a monastery." "A monastery, can you imagine?" Eleanor set down her teacup with a hand that trembled slightly. "How extraordinary." "The most peculiar part," Mrs. Pembroke continued, oblivious to Eleanor's discomfort, "is that it all began the night of the full moon last month, the night a mysterious nobleman was reportedly seen in Thornwood's company." She fixed Eleanor with a penetrating stare. "A nobleman with unusual red eyes, they say." Before Eleanor could respond, Emma burst into the parlour, her cheeks flushed with excitement rather than fever. "Mother, look what was delivered while you were entertaining." She thrust a package wrapped in black velvet into Eleanor's hands. "Emma, we do not interrupt when guests are present," Eleanor admonished gently, though secretly grateful for the distraction. "Forgive me, Mrs. Pembroke," Emma curtsied, though her eyes remained fixed on the package. "But the messenger said it was most urgent and that it came from far away." Mrs. Pembroke's curiosity visibly intensified. "Far away? How intriguing." Eleanor carefully unwrapped the black velvet to reveal a book bound in dark leather that seemed to absorb the light around it. The cover bore no title, only an embossed symbol that matched the wax seal on the letter she had received the night of Thornwood's visit, a stylized V surrounded by what appeared to be ancient script. "A gift from an admirer, Lady Blackwood?" Mrs. Pembroke inquired, craning her neck to see better. "A medical text that belonged to my husband." Eleanor lied smoothly, rewrapping the book. "I had inquired about purchasing it from a collector." After Mrs. Pembroke finally departed, Eleanor sent the children to their lessons and retreated to Edward's old study, a room she had recently reclaimed from its months of disuse. Locking the door, she unwrapped the mysterious book once more and opened it with trembling fingers. The pages were filled with handwritten text in an elegant, archaic script. The ink seemed unusually dark, almost glistening in the afternoon light. As Eleanor turned the pages, she realized with growing unease that it was not a conventional book, but a journal or chronicle of sorts. "I write these words in the year 1432. Began one entry, having witnessed yet another century of human cruelty that rivals even my own kind's worst excesses. The lord of this region, Baron Heinrich Thornwood, continues his reign of terror, extracting ruinous taxes from peasants already ravaged by plague." Eleanor gasped. Thornwood, so similar to Thornwood. Was it possible? She turned more pages, scanning entries that spanned decades, then centuries. The writer described witnessing atrocities, delivering retribution, and observing the rise and fall of families across Europe. With growing certainty, she realized she was reading the personal journal of Lord Varkos himself, or whatever his true name might be. An entry from 1665 caught her eye. "The London plague provides ample cover for my activities. Those who prey upon the suffering of others now suffer themselves, believing their afflictions to be mere disease rather than justice long overdue. The physician Harrison Blackwood suspects my nature, but keeps his counsel, focusing instead on saving those he can. Such nobility among humans remains rare, worthy of protection. Blackwood, Eleanor whispered. Harrison was Edward's great-great-grandfather. She had heard stories of the distinguished physician who had remained in London during the Great Plague while others fled. But how could Varkos have known him? The final entry was dated just 2 weeks prior. Ravenshire calls me back after decades away. The Thornwood line continues its hereditary cruelty and now targets the widow of Edward Blackwood, descendant of Harrison, whom I once admired. Perhaps this time justice might take a different form. I sense in Eleanor Blackwood a kindred darkness, a capacity for righteous vengeance that mere humans rarely possess. Could she be the one I have sought these many centuries? The one who might join me in my eternal work? Eleanor closed the book with shaking hands, her mind reeling. Varkos had known her husband's ancestor. He had been delivering justice or vengeance for centuries, and now, for reasons she couldn't fathom, he believed she might join him in this eternal work. A knock at the study door startled her from her thoughts. "Mother," Thomas called. "There's a man here from Lord Thornwood's estate. He says it's urgent." Eleanor quickly concealed the book in a drawer before opening the door. In the hallway stood Horace, Lord Thornwood's gaunt steward, looking even more cadaverous than when she had last seen him at Thornwood Manor. "Lady Blackwood," he bowed stiffly, "I bring a message from my master." "Speak, then," Eleanor replied, noting the man's nervous glances toward the windows, though sunset was still hours away. "Lord Thornwood requests, no, begs, for your immediate assistance. He is unwell." Horace's voice dropped to a whisper. "He believes only you can help him." "I am no physician, Mr. Horace." "Nevertheless, my lady, he insists. He says—" Horace hesitated. "He says that the one who watches you will listen to your plea for mercy." Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. "What do you mean, watches me?" "I know only what my master tells me, Lady Blackwood, and he has not been entirely rational these past weeks." Horace glanced again toward the windows. "He will pay whatever sum you demand. He simply begs for the torment to end." Eleanor thought of the journal hidden in her drawer, of its centuries of recorded vengeance, of Varkos's words to her that moonlit night. "Your true awakening has only just begun." "Tell Lord Thornwood I shall come at sunset," she said finally, "and I shall need no payment for my visit." After Horace departed, Eleanor unlocked the drawer and retrieved Varkos's journal, turning to an entry she had glimpsed briefly. "The nature of my curse, or blessing, allows me to act only against those who truly deserve punishment. I cannot harm the innocent, but the guilty, they see in me their deepest fears made flesh. Their own sins become the instruments of their torment." Was this what had happened to Thornwood? Was he being tormented by visions of his own misdeeds? As the afternoon waned, Eleanor made her preparations. She dressed in a gown of deep burgundy, a colour she had never favoured before but now felt strangely drawn to. Around her neck, she placed her silver locket containing the children's portraits, a reminder of what she protected. And into a small reticule she slipped Varkos's journal, feeling its weight like an anchor to a world she was only beginning to comprehend. "I shall return before your bedtime," she assured Thomas and Emma, leaving them in the capable hands of Mrs. Hodges. "Be good, and remember that I love you above all else." The sunset painted Ravenshire in bloody hues as Eleanor's hired carriage approached Thornwood Manor. The imposing structure looked somehow diminished since her last visit, its grandeur tarnished by an air of decay that hadn't been present a month before. Several windows had been boarded up, and the immaculate gardens were showing signs of neglect. Horace met her at the gates, which now bore strange symbols etched into the iron. Wards of some kind, Eleanor surmised, though she had never given credence to such superstitions before. "Thank heaven you've come," the steward said, his usual composure shattered. "He's been screaming for hours." As if to confirm his words, a wail echoed from the manor's upper floors, a sound of pure terror that made the hair on Eleanor's neck stand on end. "Most of the servants have fled," Horace explained as he led her through the entrance hall, which was now illuminated by dozens of candles and crosses placed at seemingly random intervals. "Only I and the cook remain, and she threatens to leave daily." "And Frederick?" Eleanor asked, remembering Mrs. Pembroke's gossip about Thornwood's cruel son being sent to a monastery. "Gone these 3 weeks," Horace replied. After he claimed to see." The steward shook his head. "Lord Thornwood is in his study. He refuses to leave it." The study door was reinforced with new locks and more of the strange symbols Eleanor had noticed on the gates. Horace knocked 3 times in a distinct pattern. "My lord, Lady Blackwood has arrived, as you requested." A series of locks clicked from within, and the door opened just wide enough for Eleanor to slip through. Horace made no move to follow, clearly relieved to remain in the hallway. The study was almost unrecognizable. The elegant furniture had been pushed against the walls to make room for a circle of salt on the floor, within which Percival Thornwood had apparently been living. Books of occult nature lay open on every surface, their pages marked with frantic notations. The windows were covered with heavy drapes, allowing not even a sliver of the fading daylight to enter. Thornwood himself was transformed. The corpulent, imposing figure had wasted away to a haggard shell. His clothes hung loosely on his frame, and his once florid face was ashen, with dark circles beneath bloodshot eyes that darted continuously toward the shadows. "Lady Blackwood," he croaked, gesturing for her to sit in the single chair that remained outside his salt circle. "You came. Thank God you came." "You seem unwell, Lord Thornwood," Eleanor observed, remaining standing. "Perhaps I should send for a physician." "No physician can help me," Thornwood laughed, a brittle cracking sound. "Only you can. Only you can intercede with him." "Him?" Eleanor echoed, though she knew perfectly well whom Thornwood meant. "Your protector. Your dark guardian." Thornwood's eyes bulged as he leaned toward her, still careful not to break his salt circle. "I've researched what he is. Old texts, forbidden knowledge. He's one of the ancient ones, the blood drinkers, the justice bringers. He cannot harm the innocent, but the guilty." He shuddered violently. "The guilty see their sins made flesh." "And what sins do you see, Lord Thornwood?" Eleanor asked quietly. "Every night, when darkness falls, they come for me." Thornwood's voice dropped to a whisper. "The faces of those I've ruined, the women I've used, the men I've destroyed. Your husband among them, Blackwood with his accusing eyes, with the plague boils erupting across his face as he reaches for me." His voice rose to a hysterical pitch. "And behind them all, he stands watching, those red eyes burning with the fires of hell itself." Eleanor felt a strange calm settling over her, despite the madness before her. "And what would you have me do?" "Ask him to stop," Thornwood begged, falling to his knees within his circle. "Tell him I've learned my lesson. I've reduced the rents, donated to the poor, sent Frederick away to learn humility. I've made amends." "Have you?" Eleanor opened her reticule and removed Varkos's journal. "Or have you simply acted out of fear rather than remorse?" Thornwood's eyes fixed on the book, widening in recognition. "Where did you get that?" "That's his book. I saw it in my dreams." "He gave it to me," Eleanor replied simply. "It seems he believes I have some purpose to fulfill." "Then you are in league with him." Thornwood scrambled backward within his circle. "I should have known. The widow becomes the witch." "Not a witch," came a voice from the darkest corner of the room. "Something far more interesting." Lord Varkos stepped from shadows that seemed inadequate to have concealed him, his crimson eyes gleaming in the candlelight. He wore the same immaculate black clothing, but tonight there was less attempt to appear human. His skin had the pallor of marble, his movements the fluid grace of a predator, and when he smiled at Eleanor, his teeth were unmistakably fangs. "You've been reading my journal," he observed. I had hoped you would. You wanted me to understand what you are, Eleanor replied. What you've been doing for centuries. And do you understand? Eleanor glanced at Thornwood, who had pressed himself against the far edge of his circle, gibbering prayers between sobs of terror. You deliver justice to those the law cannot touch, she said. You punish the wicked, who believe themselves beyond consequence. A simplification, but essentially correct. Varkos moved closer to her, circling her with that same predatory grace. But the question remains, why did I reveal this to you? Why, after centuries of solitary hunting, would I suddenly seek a companion? Thornwood moaned, rocking back and forth within his salt circle, which Varkos seemed unable or unwilling to cross. The journal mentioned my husband's ancestor, Eleanor said. Harrison Blackwood during the London Plague. Ah, yes, Harrison. Varkos's expression softened momentarily. A remarkable man. He suspected what I was, but offered me shelter in exchange for my promise not to hunt within the hospital where he worked. His crimson gaze fixed on Eleanor's face. I have watched your family line since then, through the generations. Waiting. For what? For one who carries both Harrison's compassion and my capacity for justice. Varkos reached out, brushing a cold finger along Eleanor's cheek. For one who might choose to become what I am. The implications of his words hit Eleanor like a physical blow. You want to make me like you? A vampire? Thornwood's sobbing intensified at the word. The term is crude but accurate enough, Varkos conceded, though we are not the mindless, bloodthirsty creatures of peasant superstition. We are executioners of divine justice, or infernal punishment, depending on one's theological bent. His eyes searched hers. I offer you power, Eleanor. Power to protect your children forever. Power to ensure that no Thornwood or his like ever threatens the innocent again. Eleanor's mind reeled. And what would be the cost of such power? Mortality. Sunlight. Perhaps eventually some measure of your humanity. Varkos gestured toward Thornwood. But consider the alternative. Men like him continue to prey upon the vulnerable, and you remain subject to time's ravages, watching your children grow old and die while you become dust. Please, Thornwood whimpered, please don't listen to him, Lady Blackwood. Send him away. Tell him I've suffered enough. Eleanor turned to the broken man, cowering in his circle of salt. This was the same Lord Thornwood who had threatened her children with homelessness, who had orchestrated her husband's death, who had looked at her with predatory eyes and suggested arrangements that made her skin crawl. And yet, is there no redemption in your justice, Lord Varkos? She asked quietly. If one truly repents. Varkos's expression darkened. Redemption is a luxury rarely earned by men like him. But he studied her face intently. Perhaps that is why I need you, Eleanor. Perhaps after centuries of vengeance, I require someone to remind me of mercy. A clock somewhere in the manor began to strike midnight, its chimes echoing through the study like a funeral bell. The hour grows late, Varkos said, and you must make your choice, Eleanor Blackwood. Join me in eternal justice, or return to your mortal life and leave Percival Thornwood to his well-deserved fate. Eleanor stood at the precipice of a decision that would alter not just her life, but her very nature. To become like Varkos, immortal, powerful, a dispenser of justice to those beyond the law's reach, or to remain human, to raise her children in the normal way, to age and eventually die as all mortals must. As the final chime faded into silence, the candles in the room flickered as one, casting massive shadows on the walls, shadows of wings and fangs and justice long delayed. What shall it be, Eleanor? Varkos asked, extending his pale hand toward her. Darkness or light, vengeance or mercy, eternity or merely a lifetime? And as Thornwood cowered and prayed, Eleanor reached toward the offered hand, her decision forming like blood crystallizing into purpose. Eleanor's fingertips hovered mere inches from Varkos's outstretched hand, the air between them charged with possibility. Time itself seemed suspended in that candlelit study where three souls stood at the crossroads of mortality and something far beyond it. "I choose," she began, her voice steady despite the tempest within. A sudden gust of wind extinguished half the candles, plunging the room into deeper shadow. Through the darkness, Eleanor saw her children's faces in her mind. Thomas with his solemn determination, Emma with her fragile strength. She thought of Edward, of his unwavering commitment to healing rather than harming, and she understood what she must do. "I choose both," she declared, withdrawing her hand. "And neither." Varkos's crimson eyes narrowed. "Explain yourself." "I will not become what you are, not tonight," Eleanor said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "But I will not abandon you to solitude, nor will I leave Lord Thornwood to torment without purpose." She stepped toward the salt circle where Thornwood cowered. "You have committed grievous wrongs, my lord. You orchestrated my husband's death, threatened my children with homelessness, and ruined countless families through your greed." "I have," Thornwood sobbed, "and I am punished nightly for it. Please, mercy." "Mercy," Eleanor repeated thoughtfully. "Not the cessation of justice, but justice tempered with purpose." She turned to Varkos. "You've existed for centuries delivering vengeance, but has your justice ever truly reformed those who deserved it, or merely destroyed them?" Varkos stood unnaturally still, a predator momentarily perplexed. "Reform has not been my concern." "Then perhaps that is where we differ," Eleanor replied. "And why you need me." She knelt at the edge of Thornwood's salt circle. "You will sign over half your remaining fortune to establish a foundation in my husband's name, a medical fund for the poor of Ravenshire. You will convert the east wing of this manor into a hospital for those afflicted with contagious diseases, and you, Percival Thornwood, will work there daily, tending to the sick under proper supervision." "Work among the diseased?" Thornwood whispered, horrified. "As Blackwood did." "Precisely as my husband did," Eleanor confirmed. "Only when you have saved as many lives as your actions have ruined will your atonement begin to be meaningful." She rose and faced Varkos once more. "This is my justice, not destruction but reconstruction, not vengeance but restitution." For a moment the ancient being's face remained impassive, his crimson eyes unreadable. Then, slowly, his lips curved into a smile that was both admiring and dangerous. "Fascinating," he murmured. "In all my centuries, I never considered justice might wear such a face." He circled her, studying her as one might examine an unprecedented marvel. "You refuse immortality, to remain a force for redemption, not merely retribution." "I refuse it tonight," Eleanor clarified. "My children need their mother, their human mother, for some years yet. But I will not pretend your offer does not resonate within me." She held up the journal. "You've watched my family for generations, waiting for someone who carries both compassion and the capacity for harsh justice. I believe I am that person, but my time has not yet come." "And when it does?" Varkos asked, his voice a silken whisper. "When Thomas and Emma are grown, established in lives of their own." Eleanor met his gaze unflinchingly. "When I have lived enough of a mortal life to value what I would sacrifice, I will seek you out." Varkos's eyes blazed with an emotion Eleanor couldn't quite define. Hope, perhaps, or something more complex that had no human name. "You would make me wait?" he asked, but there was no anger in the question, only curiosity. "A decade or so is but a moment in your existence," Eleanor replied with quiet confidence. "And the waiting will give us both time to consider if this is truly what we want." The vampire's laughter was sudden and genuine, echoing through the study. "Oh, Eleanor Blackwood, you bargain with an immortal as though we were equals." "In this moment we are," she stated simply. Thornwood watched this exchange with growing confusion, his terror momentarily superseded by bewilderment. Varkos approached the salt circle, crouching to meet Thornwood's frightened gaze. "It seems your fate has been decided, Percival. Not destruction, but service, not torment, but atonement. His voice dropped to a dangerous purr. But know this, I will be watching. Should you fail in your obligations, should you return to your cruel ways, the mercy extended today will be withdrawn. He rose fluidly to his full height. Do you accept Lady Blackwood's terms? Thornwood nodded frantically. Yes, yes, anything. The foundation, the hospital wing, all of it. Good. Varkos turned to Eleanor. And now, my dear, it seems our current business is concluded. Dawn approaches and I must take my leave. Where will you go? Eleanor asked. There are other Thornwoods in this world, Varkos replied with a predatory smile. Other injustices that require attention. But I shall return to Ravenshire when the season turns. And the visions that torment him. Eleanor nodded toward Thornwood. They will cease gradually, as his atonement proves sincere. Varkos's gaze lingered on her face. You have shown me a different path tonight, Eleanor Blackwood. Whether it is wisdom or folly remains to be seen. He moved toward the shadows, his form seeming to blur at the edges. One more matter before I depart. The journal remains with you, a token of our compact and a history you might wish to understand before you make your final choice. Eleanor clutched the book to her chest. I will read it carefully. I know you will. Varkos paused at the threshold of darkness. Until our next meeting, remember this. What I offer is not merely immortality, but partnership in an eternal purpose. Consider well if you are prepared for such a union. With those words, he melded into the shadows and was gone, leaving only the faintest scent of winter roses in his wake. Eleanor turned to Thornwood, who remained within his circle, watching her with the caution of a man who has glimpsed forces beyond his comprehension. The documents for the foundation will be drawn up tomorrow, she said briskly. I shall bring a physician to assess the East Wing's suitability as a hospital. Your atonement begins at dawn, Lord Thornwood. You could have destroyed me, he whispered. Why show mercy? Eleanor gathered her reticule, tucking Varkos's journal safely inside. Because destruction is easy, Lord Thornwood. Redemption is the greater challenge. She moved toward the door. And because my husband would have done the same. Spring blossomed in Ravenshire, transforming the once gloomy town with vibrant colour and renewed hope. The Edward Blackwood Foundation had become the talk of the county, its funds providing medicine and care for those who could never have afforded it otherwise. Thornwood Hospital, as the East Wing of the manor had come to be known, treated dozens of patients daily. True to her word, Eleanor had ensured that Percival Thornwood worked there under the supervision of qualified physicians, emptying bedpans, changing bandages, and confronting the human cost of disease and poverty he had previously ignored. To the astonishment of many, including perhaps himself, Thornwood had taken to his penance with increasing dedication. Though initially performing his duties with reluctant disgust, the passing months had wrought a change in the man. His interactions with patients grew gentler, his commitment to their recovery more genuine. The nightly visions that had tormented him gradually subsided, replaced by dreamless sleep earned through exhaustion of honest work. Eleanor, meanwhile, had established herself as a formidable presence in Ravenshire society. No longer the desperate widow, she managed the foundation with acumen that surprised those who had underestimated her. Thomas and Emma thrived, her son showing promise as a scholar, her daughter's health improving steadily with proper care and nutrition. Yet beneath this picture of restoration and renewal, Eleanor carried the weight of Varkos's journal and his promised return. Each night she read another entry from the ancient text, absorbing centuries of history witnessed through immortal eyes. The journal revealed not only Varkos's acts of justice, but also his moments of doubt, his periods of isolation, his eternal search for meaning in an existence without end. The summer solstice arrived with unusual warmth, the longest day of the year stretching golden and languorous over Ravenshire. As twilight finally descended, Eleanor sat in Edward's study, the journal open before her. She had reached the final blank pages, entries yet to be written. A soft knock at the door interrupted her contemplation. "Mother," Thomas called, "there's a package for you." Eleanor closed the journal and unlocked the study door. Her son, now 11 and growing tall, handed her a small box wrapped in black velvet. "No messenger brought it," he said, his brow furrowed in puzzlement. "It simply appeared on the doorstep as I was returning from my mathematics lesson." "Thank you, Thomas," Eleanor replied, keeping her voice steady despite the sudden quickening of her pulse. "Is your sister still with Mrs. Hodges?" "Yes, they're pressing flowers for Emma's collection." Thomas studied his mother's face. "Are you well, Mother? You've seemed preoccupied of late." Eleanor brushed a strand of hair from his forehead, such a simple, mortal gesture of affection. "I am well, my darling, simply contemplating the future." After Thomas departed, Eleanor unwrapped the velvet to reveal a small silver box. Inside lay a single black rose, impossibly fresh, and beneath it a note in familiar, elegant script. "The season turns, as promised. Midnight at the old Abbey ruins if you wish to continue our conversation. V." Eleanor closed the box, her decision already made. She had known this moment would come from the instant Varkos had vanished into the shadows of Thornwood's study months ago. The journal had only confirmed what she had sensed, that his offer was not merely one of immortality, but of purpose. She spent the evening with her children, reading to them from one of Edward's favorite books, memorizing the warmth of Emma leaning against her side, the sound of Thomas's thoughtful questions. These precious moments would sustain her through what was to come. After they were asleep, Eleanor dressed carefully in a gown of deep burgundy, the same she had worn to confront Thornwood, and around her neck she placed the silver locket containing her children's portraits. Into a small valise she packed Varkos's journal and a letter she had written to Thomas and Emma to be delivered when they were old enough to understand. The night was clear, stars scattered like diamonds across the velvet sky. The Abbey ruins stood on a hill overlooking Ravenshire, its broken arches and crumbling walls silhouetted against the rising moon. As Eleanor approached, she sensed, rather than saw, movement among the ancient stones. "You came," Varkos said, materializing from the darkness. The moonlight cast his pale features in silver relief, his crimson eyes luminous. "I confess I was uncertain." "As was I," Eleanor replied honestly. "But these months of reflection have brought clarity." "And what have you concluded, Eleanor Blackwood?" Varkos asked, circling her with that same predatory grace she remembered. "That what you offer is not escape from mortality, but entry into a different form of service." She met his gaze steadily. "I have read your journal. I understand your solitude, your purpose, and the weight of centuries. Yet you still hesitate," he observed. "Your hand does not reach for mine, as it nearly did that night, because I require certain assurances before I take such an irrevocable step." Varkos's lips curved in amusement. "You continue to bargain as though we stand on equal ground." "We do," Eleanor insisted, "for you need what I can provide as much as I desire what you offer. And what do I need, in your estimation? Compassion to temper your justice. Mercy to balance your vengeance." Eleanor stepped closer. "A companion who remembers what it is to be human." The vampire studied her, his ancient eyes unfathomable. "What assurances do you seek?" "First, my children must be protected, not just from harm, but from knowledge of what their mother has become until they are ready to understand." "Granted," Varkos nodded. "What else?" "Second, I retain my autonomy. I will join you in your purpose, but I will not be subordinate to your will. My judgment remains my own." "Such independence is precisely why I chose you," Varkos replied. "Your third condition?" Eleanor took a deep breath. "We will be partners in truth as well as purpose. No secrets between us, no matter how dark or ancient." Varkos went utterly still, a predator calculating risks. Some truths are burdens even immortals struggle to bear. "Nevertheless, I would know them," Eleanor said firmly. "I would know you, all of you, as you would know me." For a moment, the night itself seemed to hold its breath. Then Varkos extended his hand, pale and perfect in the moonlight. "Then come, Eleanor Blackwood. Let us seal this covenant of blood and purpose, of justice and mercy, of darkness illuminated by understanding." Eleanor placed her hand in his, feeling the unnatural cold of his skin. "Will it hurt?" she asked, not from fear but from simple curiosity. "Yes," he answered truthfully. "Death always does, even when it leads to rebirth." He drew her closer, his free hand cradling the back of her head with surprising gentleness. "But I promise you this, when you awaken, you will see the world with eyes that perceive both its profound beauty and its deepest corruption. You will have the power to protect those you love and punish those who deserve it." His lips brushed her throat, his voice a whisper against her skin. "And you will never again walk alone through the darkness." Eleanor closed her eyes, her thoughts turning one last time to her children sleeping peacefully at home, to Edward's memory, to the mortal life she was leaving behind. "I am ready," she whispered. Varkos's embrace tightened, and Eleanor felt the sharp pierce of fangs against her throat, pain blossoming like fire, then subsiding into an unexpected euphoria. As her lifeblood flowed from her body, she experienced not fear, but a profound sense of transformation, of boundaries dissolving between what she had been and what she would become. The stars wheeled overhead, time stretching and contracting in impossible ways. In her fading consciousness, Eleanor perceived visions of centuries past. Varkos in medieval castles, in Renaissance courts, in Victorian drawing rooms, always watching, always waiting, always alone, until now. When the threshold between life and death grew gossamer thin, Varkos drew back, his own wrist torn open by Fang. "Drink," he commanded, pressing the wound to her lips. "Complete the covenant." The taste was copper and darkness and ancient power. Eleanor drank deeply, feeling strength return to her failing body, not mortal strength, but something far more potent, something eternal. As dawn approached, the Abbey ruins witnessed a transformation centuries in the making. Where Eleanor Blackwood had stood, mortal and vulnerable, now rose a being of elegant ferocity, her eyes opening to reveal irises no longer green, but the deep crimson of freshly spilled blood. "What do you see?" Varkos asked, watching his creation with reverent attention. Eleanor looked out over Ravenshire, her newly heightened senses perceiving the town in ways her human eyes never could. She saw the patterns of life and death, of virtue and corruption, of justice served and justice denied. "Everything," she whispered, her voice carrying new harmonics that seemed to resonate with the night itself. "I see everything." Varkos took her hand, raising it to his lips in a gesture that spoke of both passion and profound respect. "And so begins our eternity, Eleanor, not as master and acolyte, but as equals in purpose." As they descended from the Abbey ruins, moving with inhuman grace through the pre-dawn shadows, Eleanor felt a complex peace settle within her transformed being. She had chosen a path that would allow her to protect her children forever, to ensure justice for the vulnerable, and to explore the depths of existence alongside a being who had walked alone for far too long. Behind them, the eastern sky began to lighten, heralding a day they would not witness, but ahead stretched infinite nights of purpose and companionship, of darkness illuminated by understanding, of justice tempered with mercy. And in that moment, as they vanished into the shadows of Ravenshire, Eleanor knew that while she had surrendered her mortality, she had not lost her humanity. Rather, she had transcended it to become something both more and less than human. An instrument of justice in a world that had forgotten its meaning, a vessel of mercy in an existence defined by vengeance. The covenant was sealed, the transformation complete, and somewhere in the distance, a nightingale sang its final song before the dawn.